Hello, I'm Laura. Thanks for joining me. This video is going to document the process that I used to take a vintage marine buoy and transform it into a giant pumpkin for an allotment that I've been working on. So this buoy had been taken out of the sea and placed on the allotment a few years ago. And as part of an art project that I was doing on the allotment, one of my tasks was to transform this buoy from a kind of rusted old piece of metal into something that was bright, colourful, and more of a attraction for people to see while they were at the allotment. So the process started with me designing 3 different options for this buoy. One was a seascape, I suppose, that made its way around the buoy with a ship on the top. So this obviously came from the history of the object itself, having been at sea and used for marine navigation, but also because the town of Boston, where the allotment is, has a large history to do with the Mayflower. So the second option for a design for this buoy sculpture was for it to become a beehive with flowers on the top, bees around the sides. And this was because obviously allotments rely a lot on pollinators, bees, hoverflies, other insects to come pollinate the crops so that fruit and vegetables can be grown and taken away as a harvest. So the shape of the buoy kind of suggested a bit of a beehive-y shape if we were clever about how it was painted to kind of transform it into that shape, as well as there being this link to bees and pollinators. So the third idea was, of course, the pumpkin. So the shape of the buoy really suggests a pumpkin. And one of my friends, in fact, saw a photo of it whilst I was working on ideas and said, "It looks like a pumpkin. It's a perfect shape." So I developed this idea into a design, thought, how can we add something else to the top of this as a sculptural element as well, and went with the idea of using hosepipes to create vines to kind of give a bit of movement and add some more shapes and dimension to the object itself. The 3 ideas were taken to plot holders and a vote was cast, and the pumpkin, of course, won. So before I headed to the allotment myself, I'd had a technician in to angle grind away the rust that was on the buoy. And as you can see here, they painted the whole thing with some bonding primer to stop the rust from coming back. So with the surface nice and smooth and rust free for me, I could then start the first coat of orange on the buoy. This paint is normally used to coat farmyard machinery and vehicles, so I knew that it was going to be heavy wearing. It would mean that once all of this work and time had been spent on this buoy to turn it into this hopefully beautiful sculpture, it was going to last for years to come. As you can see, I've already painted the first coat of orange, so it's already beginning to look slightly pumpkin-like. It's quite a good shape for it as well. The next thing is to add leaves, get in there and put some detail on and some shading and things like that. We're going to add some bugs on too, butterflies, ladybirds, bumblebees. And then once that's done, I'm going to be using some old hose pipes to create some sculptural elements on the top of it to make it look like it's got vines and leaves growing out of it. Maybe some flowers as well. So I better get cracking. So although this paint was perfect because it was going to be hard wearing and it was available in hundreds of colours, which was fantastic, it was a slightly different texture of paint to what I'm used to painting with it being more of a paint designed for machinery, and with it being gloss paint, it wasn't really designed for making detailed artwork. So it was quite interesting getting used to the texture of the paint and finding the right kind of techniques to use with it. So I found that stippling the paint on was the best way to achieve the kind of gradient that I needed for the shadowy effects on the pumpkin to give it those ridges. And when it came to doing the details, you might notice in the video, I have to keep going back to spots. So I do one piece and I go back to it. And this wasn't necessarily because it needed more coats, it was because the gloss paint would drip and run. So I was having to put it on quite thinly and then go over detailed parts again. The buoy on the sides, which was the main painting area that I was working on, was vertical. So it meant that any slight danger of it dripping meant that, you know, we were going to have paint running down the sides of this sculpture. So I had to make sure that I was being really careful with how I applied this paint so that it wouldn't drip all down the sides. One of the really interesting and lovely things about working in this environment were the people that would walk past and stop to have a chat while I was working. It was really nice to surprise people who weren't expecting to see an artist on an allotment plot making a painting or creating a sculpture out of hose pipes. And I had some really interesting conversations with people. I'd done projects before where I would make with an audience, but these were always people that were expecting to see me. But it was quite fun to be somewhere unexpected and surprise people and hopefully bring them a little bit of joy during their walk. A lot of people commented on how it was great that this bright, colourful object was now appearing on the allotments to sort of brighten the space up. And that was one of the ideas. The original ideas for this in particular was that this would be here in the winter time when the allotments were not being used very much and there was not many green and brightly coloured plants growing. And this would be something to brighten up the space when nature was taking a break. So similar to how I'd asked people to vote on which design they wanted the buoy to be turned into, I'd asked plot holders on the allotment which animals and bugs should be painted on the side of the pumpkin. Butterflies was one of them, frogs, bees, hoverflies, all of the favourites that you might expect. So I chose a peacock butterfly after looking up the top most common butterflies in the UK, and also it's such a beautiful pattern with those sort of eye-like wings that it just seemed like a really eye-catching design to add to the side of this buoy. And this one faces the path as well, so it really sort of catches the eye as you walk past. And of course we had to add a bumblebee on there. It's a lot of people's favourite insect and a really popular one on the allotment site. You can see here how I'm attempting to paint the wings in. I was mentioning earlier about the paint being a kind of interesting texture that I hadn't really worked with before, but it was actually really good for making these kind of translucent wings. So you might think this one's a wasp. It is in fact a hoverfly, and they're really important for pollinating crops on allotments. Next I added a crane fly. So this might not be an obvious one for people's favourite insects, I suppose. They frustrate a lot of people. But there was a plot holder who faced this side of the pumpkin, and I was speaking to him one day about what I was doing and how it was going, and I asked him what insect is missing, what insect do you think I should put on here? And that was his answer. So we added one on the side so that when he was sat in his chair having a break from digging or harvesting or seed sowing, then he'd be able to see the crane fly that he'd chosen to be on the pumpkin. As you can see, the painting has been completed. The weather has been good, and it's meant that I've been able to get it done in a fairly good time. And I'm back today to add the hose pipes to the top. So we're going to create some vines and eventually some flowers on the top there to create a kind of sculptural element to it. So once again, let's get cracking and see how it goes. So one of the things that first gave me the idea to add a sculptural element to the top of this buoy was the fact that when I went and first had a look at this, it had these holes in the top. It was perfect for attaching something else to it, and they just happened to be the perfect size for hose pipe, almost as if I planned it. So you can see here I'm using the hose pipe just to create a base structure really. There's a few hoops and a few decorative things in there, but mainly I'm just creating the base for a weave that will later be able to attach more decorative and more thought out shapes and patterns to. Once I'd created this base weave on top of the sculpture, I had to head into the studio to create the finer details with the hose pipe. This was because the weather was getting quite cold and I was having to use gloves while I was working, and the details that I was going to have to do next, I couldn't really use gloves to achieve. I found these really handy stainless steel cable ties, and they're kind of turning into my new favourite thing. My plan originally was to use pipe clips to hold the hoses in place. But when I discovered these cable ties with this tool that you kind of use like a pump action and it tightens the cable for you, it was just really so much quicker than the thing that I had planned. And they're really strong, and with them being stainless steel, once again I knew they were going to be durable for outdoors. So I've sped up the clip here because this process took a long time, but I think it was really worth it, and I think that the finished result was really effective.